So, welcome to the second lecture in the series Topics in Historical Linguistics. Last week we were looking at what constitutes German in a diachronic view, so looking at loan words from Indo-European times up to the Middle High German period. And what I'm going today is to take the Middle High German period, but look across in a synchronic view at what is an essay topic for you to discuss. Is that another language? Is it another dialect? Is it a variety of German, namely Middle Low German, and how this relates to overall the concept of Deutsch? So this is the map I showed already last week, which gives an overview of the structure of Germanesses around the period 1400. At that time when the varieties had more or less an equal weight. So if you were looking for a prestige variety in the year 1400, it wouldn't necessarily be Standard German as we know it now, definitely not Hanover, but it might well be actually the language spoken north of the Benrath line in the Platt area of the Norddeutsche Tiefebene and the dialects spoken around Lüneburg, Lübeck. Lübeck, so at the Baltic Sea here, being the not just self-proclaimed but quite far acknowledged queen of the Hanse League. So a trade area stretching across the Baltic Sea, across the North Sea. So you could trade with one variety of German as far north as Bergen, as far east as Novgorod, as far west as Newcastle. And you had a big Hanseatic contour in London. Any of you ever been in London, in that area, where you can still see some of the architecture? So an area linked also with certain architectural features, such as brick Gothic, in forms of dress and manner. And you have the big black lines dividing Low German and Central German, and then Middle Central German and Middle High German, but you don't have a big bad dark line from north to south, so between what is now the Netherlands and what is now northern Germany or Germany. And the picture changes. So here you have map from circa 1900, and the basic varieties are still the same, but the underlying prestige and data is quite different from it, because all the Low German varieties have become from the variety of prestige to something that is just orally spoken, a regiolect, while west of the now national border between Germany and the Netherlands, the Middle Low German variety has become the national language, so has become the standard variety. And so while there is still mutual intelligibility, the speakers of Low German east of the German border will have learned Low German only either through their grandparents by now, or in a newly established primary school program. So Hamburg started only 10 years ago, and Schleswig-Holstein to try to revive Low German as a spoken language through introducing it in primary school. But it's about the status, but probably even less than Welsh is in Wales. So you will have certain regions where people still encounter the original language in its natural habitat. For most parts, it's just a historic reminiscence. So you have a bifurcation from sister varieties between Middle Dutch and Middle Low German to sister languages, Schwesternsprachen in German, where especially after World War II, the two varieties have drifted further apart. So several factors feeding into that. One being the political divide, much less kleiner Grenzverkehr after the war. Then technological advance, where for new words you would look to each standard variety. So the Low German speakers wanting to speak about computers would borrow it from Standard German. The dialect speaker from just west of the border would look to Standard Dutch to import new words. So you have a drifting apart of these varieties. This was just a brief outlook. I now want to focus really on the medieval period and the perception and usage of the language. And I won't go through the whole quotation in detail, with a testimony of somebody not from the Low German speaking area, namely Hugo von Trimberg. I gave a whole lecture series on his didactic poem Der Renner, which was written around 1300 in Bamberg. And as a schoolmaster, he had some really shrewd observations on language and its importance, and it picks up also on the debate of what is German. And he says, "Zwer Tütsche will eben tichten, der muss sin Herze richten auf mannigerleie Sprache." So Tütsch, Deutsch, for him is constituted by a variety of languages or redialects. "Zwer wähnt, dass dir von Aache redden als dir von Franken, dem sollen die Müse danken. Ein irklich Land hat sinen Sitte, der sinem Landvolke folget Mitte. An Sprache, an Maße und an Gewande ist unterscheiden Land von Lande." So dialect for him has a regional characteristic similar to how you have different regional dresses, but also different measurements. So if you were to travel around that period through the German-speaking lands, you would have to change your pounds to ounces from region to region. And then he has quite a fun passage where he tries to characterize the different dialects. I'm not quite sure how linguistically accurate he is describing it. I think much of it is just for the fun of the sounds. Swaben ihr Wörter spaltend, die Franken ein Teil sie faltend, die Bayer sie zerrend, die Thüringer sie sperrend, die Sachsen sie bezückend, die Rhinlüte sie verdrückend, die Wetterreiber sie würgend, die Miesner sie vollschürgend, Eggerland sie zwenkend, Österreicher sie schränkend, Stierland sie basslenkend, Kerndein-Teil sie senkend, Beheim, Ungarn und Lamparten hauend nicht mit Tütscher Barten. Eine Hellebarde is a weapon. What's the? I forgot to look up what a hellebarde is in English. It's
a halberd.
Oh, is it the same? Yeah, halberd. Yeah.
A halberd.
Yeah. So it's like a long spear with a.
With an axe bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So and his imagining is really using language to break down reality around you, to fight your corner. And he characterizes all these non-German languages, and says all these other countries cannot are unknown to German speakers, and he warns from of to use loan words indiscriminately. So, wer das mischet in Tütsch Gedichte, die Meisterschaft ist gar zu nichte. So, whoever mixes loan words from Greek or Arabic, Chaldean into German messes up the poem. So in that respect, he is with the purists of the 18th century. Interesting is I had kind of color-coded the varieties he is discussing in detail, and the only Low German dialect he is mentioning is then Westfalen, so the area around Münster, where I was born, and just so kind of giving an anecdotal evidence about the going back of dialect. My great-great-granduncle wrote Low German plays for the Jeunesse Dorée in Münster, which he performed with them as fundraiser for the zoo he had founded. It was the first public zoo in Germany. He was quite a character, also known as der dolle Professor, the mad professor. Hermann Landra, because he lived with his chimpanzees and had them clad in cassocks to annoy the Catholic clergy, and had a gorilla skeleton which he claimed to be his grandfather. But that's by the by, just to illustrate Münster, very Catholic and predominantly Low German speaking until 1900, and when I was born in the late 1960s, in Münster you wouldn't hear any Low German spoken in the city itself, but we had a babysitter who came from a village outside Münster, and there they would still speak the Münsterländer Platt, but she said to us that she was constantly told off by the teacher she shouldn't speak the dialect, she should speak proper German. So that is then the time when the dialect is receding. But back to Hugo von Trimberg. He calls all these, even those in the far north where he isn't very familiar with, as Landsprache. So Land plural of in the sense of Länder, nowadays Bundesländer. So these are regional languages, and he approves actually enriching your own dialect through the loan words from these other languages. Sver us den ich Gurtes nimmt, das Woll in sinem Getichte zimmt, mich dünket, dern habe nicht missetan, tut erst mit Künste und nicht nach Wahn. So, and you can observe that in the period that you have, as you would expect, for example, in the area of Schifffahrt or technology related to seafaring or overseas trade. You have a lot of Low German loan words also in High German. You can always spot them by their double voiced plosive. So Flagge, Ebbe, for example, are loan words from loan German. So Ebbe, like low tide, Flagge, the flag you have on a ship. And so he approves borrowing from Low German, even if this results in tongue twisters. Alleine sie manniger Zungenband würgen, zwicken und binden vorn, mitten und hinden. So I gave you this diagram from Chris Wells on the right-hand side last week for looking at the periods of development of High German. And if you compare that to the development of Low German and then Middle Dutch, Johanneke might correct me, I just took the dates for Dutch from Wikipedia, you see there are slightly different phases, and I should have also tried more to show that they are drifting closer and further apart in the different periods. So Middle Low German is the period when Low German is actually a variety of prestige, as is Flemish spoken in that period. If you remember Helmbrecht using Flemish words to greet his parents when coming home to show off that he is a real knight. And so the Middle Low German period more or less coincides with a period of the Hanseatic League, and it ends with a downfall or the phasing out of the Hanseatic League for several different factors. So here you have extra linguistic reasons really influencing the development of the language, because the East India Company takes over most of the overseas trade, and with the Reformation and printing, the book circulation throughout Germany becomes dominated by standard High German publications that are supra-regionally intelligible. So while Standard German would have been intelligible to at least the part of the population that were able to read and write in northern Germany, Low German would have been hard to understand for southern German merchants. So this Low German sinks down to become oral variety and doesn't develop a standardized umbrella language, while High German goes through several phases of standardization, and through that can take over further variety. So from a kind of continuum of dialects, you come to distinct sections. But even in the 13th century, Berthold von Regensburg, so another kind of southern German author observing northern German things, says, dass die Niederländer und die Oberländer gar ungleich sind an der Sprache. So, and Nieder or low, obviously not talking about prestige of variety, but simply to the geography of the lay of the land. I've brought you a quotation from an early Belgian Germanist and Romanist who wanted to argue that really the Low German varieties were the connecting factor across the country. And he wrote it in an antiquated, a 19th century variety of Flemish. So I switched my spell checker to Dutch just to show also the differences between 19th century Belgian variety of Dutch and 20th century modern Dutch. If you come here, so then it records, just read the...
Alright. Een Vlaming reizen van Oostende naar Keulen en klimmen vandaar het noorden op, door Hannover en Westfalen, langs de kusten der Oostzee, tot bij Danzig, indien hij onderweg zijn taal naar de letters spreekt en goed articuleert, op zulke wijze als voorheen hier te lande de Jezuïeten plachten te prediken. Hij zal zich overal doen verstaan. Immers, evengoed als hij met zijn eigen dialect in Brabant of Holland terechtkomt. De schippers van Hamburg en Lübeck hebben ten allen tijden in Antwerpen hun zaken, zonder tussenkomst van een vertaler kunnen drijven. En daarom betuigt Kiliaan in de voorrede van zijn Nederduits woordenboek dat hij niet enkel voor de Nederlanden heeft gearbeid, maar ook voor een groot deel van Duitsland. Men zegt dan niet dat men nergens met onze taal voort kan. Het grondgebied waar Nederduits gesproken wordt, is ten minste van zo'n grote omvang als dat waar Frans of Engels de moedertaal zijn.
Thank you. Johanneke is going to give the lecture in 2 weeks' time, where you will hear more about also then the differences and continuancy to Frisian. If you look at the ASNA, the Atlas spätmittelalterlicher Sprachen des niederdeutschen Altlandes und angrenzende Gebiete, you can see that it's really a gradual shift of forms. It's just a language map for the word alt, and you don't have a clear cut where the national borders are. You have a gradual adding in of sound varieties. The quotation just mentioned the first Dutch grammar, which was written in a dialogue form. And there the word, how would you pronounce it? Deutsch? Deutsch. Is still used as the generic term. So one of the figures abbreviated with the G in the text here, Gedeon says to Römer, ik spreek in het gemeen van de Duitse taal, dieselbe voor één taal houdende. I hold that really the German language is one, and that in a volume for Niederdeutsche Letterkunst, and Niederdeutsch really meaning in that sense the Dutch grammar. You might remember when we discussed the term Deutsch, that it's related to deutlich, verdeutlichen. So, zu Düte sagen in High German means both to translate into German and to explain, interpret something. And so in this Woordenboek der Nederlandse Taal, you have the explanation that the words are in onze Nederlandsche Sprache verdeutscht. So that you have verdeutscht as terminus for explain. So it's interpreted in our Low Country language in the vernacular. An interesting development is the term Low German, which only starts coming in the mid-16th century. So at a time when Reformation printing was looking to maximize audiences, and publishers would quite often print things once for everybody south of the Benradlinie, including Switzerland, and one version for everybody north of there. So the term Niederdeutsch then develops, but it vanishes from sight fairly soon, because the Belgians then use it to as pejorative term for those the Protestants in the north who speak like those from Germany. So it gives way to the either just using Deutsch as versus French language, or Nederlandsch as a regional language of the Nederland. And it's only revived Niederdeutsch as a linguistic term in the late 19th century. Funnily enough, the Romance terms for Dutch in the 16th century sources are Flaming or Allemand. And I like, so the Spanish term for Dutch is flamenco, which I hadn't realized before doing that. And then in 1815, the Vienna Congress determines Nederlands as official name for the language of the Low Countries. the rest of today I'll spend going through three Low German, Middle Low German texts with you. So just a few linguistic explanations on how to read Middle Low German texts. Most of the sounds are actually pronounced exactly like in modern German. It had a rolled R at the front, which I only had to learn. It's not spoken in North German dialects nowadays. So when we moved from Lüneburg to Franconia when I was 13, I had to learn to roll the R to be accepted into the choir, where it was required that you could roll. And I trained it by saying the word Brötchen, so Brötchen, but with a D, and if you say it quicker and quicker, Brötchen, 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 you eventually arrive at that. Give it a go with a Brötchen. Then the G was probably not G, but K, so like the back sounded CH, like in standard German, after dark vowels. And the sh sound was probably spoken as two distinct consonants. It's still used in Westphalian, and even though I was born in Münster, I can't properly say it. Can you say it? Schrinken, Schnittchen?
Schrinken, Schnittchen.
Yeah, yeah. So you would schrinken, yeah.
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 Schapen, scheren, scheren.
Yeah, all right. So I would have to train to get the schrinken, Schnittchen properly, but then I'm a vegetarian, so I don't need to learn it. Like in manuscript variations, so I just had some of you with a Easter plays where in the non-normalized form a lot of Y is used. That is just a graphic variation of I. So dy is pronounced as D. Lycht, Licht. And then the most important thing to remember when reading Low German is that an E after a vowel is not an umlaut, but a Dehnungs-E always. So you might know the place name Soest, spelled S-O-E-S-T, which Southern German people quite often get wrong. So the word spelled B-O-E-K is pronounced as Boek, but it's not obligatory to put it in. It can also be put as a superscript above that. So the dot just means dead, Boek, but then umlaut isn't marked at all in Middle Low German, even though we know from studying contemporary dialects that it was pronounced. So the rule of thumb is to say an umlaut wherever you would have an umlaut in modern standard German. And there are a few additional words. Also, there is no diphthongization of the long Ü. So in Middle High German, Lüte becomes in modern German Leute, but it stays as Lüde in Middle Low German. Initial V is always, like in Middle High German, pronounced as F. Then you have a very open form of O, which is nearly like an R, so the spelling can be variable between, for God, it's somewhere between R and O, God, and you would normally write it as R at the end of a syllable, but as an O in the middle of a syllable. So although it's the same vowel, you have here God, and God is spelled differently. So this just as an explanation how I'll sound, not that I'm a trained Middle Low German speaker, but I've been reading and editing a lot of Middle Low German because for the last 6 years I've been editing with a group of historians from Germany a fairly unique source, the largest group of letters written by medieval women, 1,800 letters from the convent of Lüne, beautiful complex near Lüneburg, which had just celebrated last year its 850th anniversary and has never been dissolved. So it retains all its archival material. And it's actually thanks to these letters that the nuns were able to morph into Protestant Benedictines, because they were able to show and document to the Duke of Braunschweig-Lüneburg that they always had been independent spiritually and economically. So he had to stop forcing them to give up their buildings and to leave the convent. And they reached an agreement whereby they were allowed to continue their style of living and only had to accept the Eucharist under both forms and have a Lutheran minister instead of a Catholic priest. So you see this big fat volume, which is just the first 450 of the 1,800 letters. And the nuns write in 3, not really languages, but registers. And so their dialect was that of the North German. Lüneburg is here, North Low Saxon, bordering on Eastphalian. So that would have been the language with which they grew up. But they came to the convent aged 5 to 7 and then underwent 10 years of Latin schooling. So they learned all their rhetoric and grammar in Latin. So they write to their families in Low German. They write to the clergy in Latin. And for me, the most interesting, well over a third of letters, is kind of internal, informal correspondence between these convents, because there was a group of 5 convents, all financed by the salt trade through the Hanseatic League from Lüneburg. And there they use a code-switching language that mixes their acquired school language with their native dialect. So I'll show you first extracts from a letter dictated by a girl who had just entered the convent. She was slightly older, so she was already 8 when she came into the convent, and is dictating this letter after having lived for a couple of months in the convent, sending her parents an update on how she is faring in the convent. And I think it was kept in the convent as a model for fundraising purposes. It's I just did a promotional video with 3 of the German for beginners students talking about how marvelous it is to study German in Oxford, and it reads exactly like that. So how wonderful life is as a young girl in the convent. Kindliche leven tevoren. Min alder leveste en und der en. So it's been kind of anonymized to be used for other purposes again. Ik juwe leve dochter, do ju gläflichen weten, dat ich von Gottes Gnaden sund und de Wolte passen bin und mach hier gerne Wesen in diesem Kloster. Und ich danke jü des von allem meinem Herzen, dat je meinen Willen daran habet und habet mir dazu holpen, dat ich hier innekommen bin und der habet mir dazu geben allend, was ich bedarf hätte. Ich hoffe, wann ich nur größer werde, dass ich dem Leben Gode hier in diesem Wiengarten dänen mach. So will ich dat mit meinem Bäde verschulden und de jü afverdänen. Und wat ich euch hier lavete, do ich bi was, dat will ich mit der Hilfe Gottes wohl holden und vollen bringen und will unser Leben dompnen und all den Leben Jungfrauen gerne behörig und de Willen wesen, wo ich kann nach allem Vermöre. Und ich bin, Gott heft Lof, in Neve Quade da gekommen. I should do the but I'll end up with a throat infection. I'm not, so I'll just slightly verneuhochdeutsche it. Unser Leben Domina heft mir so leif als ihre lief. Ich äte mit er und ihrem Vater und trinke mit er und sie sorgt mir jo alle Tit dat beste Uf und gift mir Faken de Kühleken und de Flögelken von dem Hörneken und de Knökelken von der anderen Spiese. So, I've got a new chef in college who's doing street food where she can pick and mix the best bites. Die ich gerne mach. Die lässt mir alle Tit otsoken und ich sage jo Faken to er, och, Lebeweis Domina, ich wollte, dass mein Leben ein und ein wüssten, dass ich hier so wohl bin. Und wenn ich ein Vögelchen wäre und hätte 2 Flüchte, so wollte ich zu ihm pflegen und wollte ihm sagen, wo Leif je mir habet und wo Fehle je mir gegeben habet. So sagt denn die Weske Domina, nein, mein liebe Kind, ich mach Diener nur nicht entbehren. So, you might have noticed, the girl is calling the abbess ihr, even though they are probably related, while the abbess is calling the child du. Nein, mein liebe Kind, ich mach Diener nur nicht entbehren. Ich will bitten den hielgen Geist, der schall also in Wied düve pflegen, hen zu dienen leben en und gäven jüm in ihre Härte, dat du hier nicht övel bist. All der Leben ist der en, wann ich noch all de Tvechte Flüchte hätte und konnte zu ihr fliegen, so konnte ich doch Tomale nicht trägen und mitnehmen, wat mir mein Leben Weske Domina und der anderen Jungfrauen Tomale geben haben. So then she asked to say greetings to everybody, und weset Gott befohlen, sund und selig zu langen Tiden, geschreven ut annen Moleken ihre Munde mit fremder Hand. So Moleken, the ken ending which you already had with all the different food items, like High German chen, the diminutive. So this is an example for probably as close as we can get to spoken Low German, because it tries to really pretend, or perhaps it's true that it's a girl over enthusiastically speaking to her parents, and really an authentic document of well-being. And even if it's not authentic, it's what at that time would have been convincing to her parents and make them send more money and contribute to the newest fundraising campaign. From the same time, now the letter of one Gertrud von Elsen to another Gertrud von Elsen. So these were all the same patrician families from Lüneburg who were sending their daughters in the different convents around the region. So it's really a very close-knit group having exactly the same upbringing. And you can again think of it as if you have kind of 2 Oxford graduates speaking to each other, using a lot of slang or in-words that wouldn't be understandable to anybody but those who had undergone the same diet of toots and rugger tournaments or whatsoever. They start off in the formulas they have learned in school on how to start a letter. So these letters normally start off in pure Latin, and then they mix more and more Low German in, but switch back to Latin for standard formula. Precordialissima N. Ik do caritati vestre vriendelijken te wetende dat ik, permittente divina bonitate Dei, bin in bona sospitate. Et ipsum affectere ik van ju und van unser leven amitem Lucia van Elsen te wetende, tempore longevo secundum bene placitum divinum. Ceterum praectamentissima amita. So all these kind of structuring devices, as you would still have in modern German, where you say item, or have these kind of in Latin. Ceterum praementissima amita regratio vestrinati caritati promultis in numeris beneficii, sündigen vor de groten leefmödigkeit die je mi leest bewieseten. So whenever it gets emotional, it switches over into the vernacular. So here the Leefmödigkeit, die Liebmütigkeit is in Low German. But note, even these closely related nuns are using ihr with each other as a sign of respect for their status, despite using really intimate language. So she has sent the other nun gilded little devotional images. Dat is mi noch nicht vergeten. Et mut jü des Danken toto tempore vitae me. Und ich kann das auch nicht vergessen, quam dio vixero. Nam quotiens intuior oculis corporiis, totiens mirum et inauditum gaudium experio interius. So this is a very rhetorically structured sentence where you have the contrast between inner and outer, the eyes of the body and the eyes of the souls, and in between mixed reference to the apocalypse with a unheard of joy. But then it switches to German, and again, in German you have lots of diminutive form. Und davon wird min Hertiken saepius recreert. So recreert is a new loan word from Latin, recreare, to renew, recreate, but with a Low German ending. Wann ich aliqua molestia vexert bin ex multis occupationibus und den illus principes gloriosus ansehe, so latet mi dünken, wo se mi pondus totius meroris statim allevieren. So allevieren, you have another loan word to alleviate, from Latin to make light, but with a Low German ending. And then she goes on that she now wants to send gifts in exchange, and sends her a pair of gloves, that Paar Handschen. She sends her the money to pay for the gloves that the other Gertrud has sent over, which had been requested by the abbess, and asked for apologies, dat we daar so lange mede tarteert hebben, that we have tarried so long, we have been delaying this so long. And this hoc evenit ex multis in numeris occupationibus. Dat we ze des nene mate hebben konden ju aliqua to skrivende. Voor so doske we us des nicht presumeren, dat we sie Sylven hätten schreven, darum dat so lange Tid vergangen ist. So you see, the business of emailing isn't for a delayed essay isn't quite as different from the letters of the nuns, and then they send over some further gifts, namely some sweets. It always ends again in Latin. Nil plus comes as formula, and then the sign of language. I had it's now nearly 5 to 4. So I won't dwell long on it, but an interesting area then to look into would be Bible translation into Low German, and to compare it with a Low Germanized version of the Luther Bible. So the separate Bible translation, which I've pulled up here, was done by the other wing of the Protestant Reformation, the Presbyterians, Calvinists, Zwingli branch, who didn't want to rely on what they saw as a quite theologically dressed translation of Luther, but wanted to have a more literal translation directly from Greek. So this is a translation done from scratch from Greek into Low German, and including a Low German translation of the French annotations to the New Testament done in Geneva, the center of the Calvinist movement. I'll just point out here that here he says for the Nederlandsche Gemeinde, he has it oversetten, also übersetzt, Ende verdütschen. So here you have verdütschen again in the sense of explain, turn into the vernacular. And you have here much more literal translation of the greeting to Mary, so you have neither the Catholic formula following the Latin, Hail Mary, full of grace, nor you have Luther's deliberate, idiomatic way trying to escape using the word grace for Mary at all, to say Gott grüß dich, liebe Maria, oder Holdselige. So it stays more literal with a Greek without going into the fullness. So, weest gegroot, gij begenadigde, de Heere is mit u, gij gesegnete onder den Vrouwen. I just discussed with a paper 4 group I'm teaching that Luther has the angel say du to Mary because he wants to enforce his point that this is idiomatic German, while the Low German translation stays with the formal register. I won't go further into other translations, just point out that next week we have some very different forms of address, namely swearing. It should be a hugely enjoyable session with Geraldine Horan. You might have heard her. She gave the lecture on language of National Socialism in the last lecture series on LTE the Lingua Tertii Imperii. So that will be here in 1 week, and in 2 weeks we'll have Johanneke looking even further northwest from where we've been looking today and situating Old Frisian among the Germanic languages. So another possible contribution for your essays on what constitutes a dialect, what is a language. Thank you.